Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. The man the Trump administration mistakenly deported to an El Salvador mega prison is back in the United States and faces a new criminal indictment. The Justice Department today filed charges against Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was sent to El Salvador in March. He entered the country illegally in 2011, but was given legal status to stay in the U.S. The Supreme Court had ordered the Trump administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. In an afternoon news conference, Attorney General Pam Bondi formally announced his arrest on allegations of human trafficking.
The grand jury found that over the past 9 years, Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. They found this was his full-time job, not a contractor.
We are also watching the fallout from President Trump's public feud with billionaire Tesla CEO Elon Musk. CBS News has learned Musk would like to have a conversation with the president after trading jabs and insults on social media. Sources say President Trump has not made a decision about speaking to Musk. Remember, this all started after Elon Musk openly criticized the Republican budget bill, calling it an abomination. The bill contains several items key to President Trump's legislative agenda. The White House is pushing for the Senate to pass the bill ahead of a self-imposed July 4th deadline. We also have our eye on the Supreme Court. The justices are blocking a lower court ruling that would have required President Trump's Department of Government Efficiency from disclosing its records to an outside watchdog group. In a separate decision, the court is also letting DOJ have access to Social Security data for now. And new data from the Labor Department shows steady job growth last month, despite economic uncertainty from the president's tariffs. But we begin with CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen. Jake, good to have you on. Walk us through these new allegations about Abrego Garcia.
That's right, Tom. A couple of months ago, there was video that surfaced from state police in Tennessee showing Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man who's now at the center of another legal battle around his legal status here in America, showing him driving a full car with a number of men in it. And the officer who pulled them over cited this as a potential human trafficking incident. There were no charges brought, but what the Trump administration did, it appears, in order to comply technically with this court order from up in Maryland in which a federal judge ordered his return, is to bring him back and charge him. We had heard, Tom, in court that the Department of Justice said that any step he took back into the United States, whether it was he found his way out of that Supermax prison and came and presented himself at a port of entry, or if he was ever returned by the government, that he would be arrested and detained immediately and removed to another country. Obviously, this is kind of a twist in that development in which Pam Bondi says he's going to be charged here on 2 counts, 1 count of conspiracy to transport illegal immigrants and another of actually doing it.
Yeah, I saw that indictment, some very serious charges written there. Now, he was deported, then he was brought back. What happens next in this case? And could Abrego Garcia get deported again?
We're expecting an initial appearance tonight in which he would have to present himself and the charges would be read against him. It would not be an arraignment, so that would likely come at some point later next week, given the late hour, and it is a Friday night and courts are not open usually over the weekend. But what we do know is that Attorney General Pam Bondi told me after I asked her a question of, in a lot of these cases, Tom, the Department of Justice has actually dropped the charges after initially filing them and has just moved to deport people. And certainly, given Abrego Garcia's past here being, and the government admitting to having wrongly removed him to El Salvador in the first place, it would be a potentially logical step for them to just move him to another country and kind of free their hands of this. Attorney General Pam Bondi said she intends on prosecuting him in Tennessee, convicting him in Tennessee, and if he is convicted, sentencing him to American prison time here in the States, and then that he would be deported to another country.
Jake Rosen with the late-breaking developments. Jake, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica is also a law professor at Loyola University. Jessica, so good to see you. From what Attorney General Pam Bondi announced in the press conference today and the indictment that was unsealed, what do you make of the government's case here?
What I make of the government's case is that, just as you had a conversation with Jake Rosen, that this is about human smuggling and a conspiracy to commit human smuggling. It's not about some of the other allegations that we heard about publicly, where the Trump administration said that Mr. Abrego Garcia might have committed other crimes. They're zeroing in on really this one issue. And certainly, I think we will have to follow the federal case to see whether or not both charges proceed and how this case continues.
So the Supreme Court previously ordered the Trump administration to return Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. after mistakenly deporting him to El Salvador. Does this indictment resolve that outstanding order?
So, yes and no. I think for all intents and purposes, it really kind of moots it out. They said that he should be returned. He has been returned. Now, could there be ongoing litigation about whether or not the government complied with the Supreme Court order? There absolutely could be. But in this case, I think what we see is the Trump administration did eventually follow what the Supreme Court said. He is back in this country. Now, they have not decided, as we just discussed in the first question, they have not decided to institute immigration proceedings. Instead, what they've decided to do is to institute federal criminal proceedings against him. That is an interesting decision. And again, the next step now is not that he goes to an immigration court, it's that he goes to a federal criminal court for an arraignment.
I want to pull on your legal expertise a little bit and play this out. So let's say the government is able to convince a jury and ultimately secure a conviction against Abrego Garcia. What would then happen? Could he eventually return to El Salvador?
Eventually, yes. So if he is convicted in a federal court, then what happens is he will serve his sentence in a federal prison. Again, I know we should just emphasize at this moment, if, right? So at this point, we're just at the indictment. But if he, in fact, does end up facing these charges, if he is, in fact, convicted, then he would serve time in a federal prison. At that point, you could begin the process of removing him to El Salvador.
Jessica Levinson, always a joy to talk to you. Good to see you as well.